The image didn't just shock football fans, it stopped them cold. For a split second, everything else disappeared. The score, the weather, the playoff implications, all of it faded into the background. What remained was a tight camera shot broadcast coast to coast, showing something most people were never supposed to see on live television. A rookie quarterback standing on the sideline, eyes locked forward, jaw clenched, and blood running down his throwing hand. Not a scrape, not a bruise, something far worse. So graphic that networks would later be questioned for even letting it air. And in that moment, America wasn't just watching a football game anymore. They were watching a career hang in the balance. That quarterback was Shedeur Sanders, and whether people loved him, doubted him, or had already written him off, none of that mattered anymore, because this wasn't about hype or legacy or who his father was. This was raw, unfiltered, real. A young player fighting for relevance in a league that chews through rookies without remorse, now standing in freezing temperatures with a hand that looked like it didn't belong on a football field. And what happened next would split fans, ignite social media, and quietly expose just how fragile trust really is inside the Cleveland Browns organization. The date mattered. Late December, the season almost over, every snap under a microscope, every mistake magnified. For Shedeur, this wasn't just another game, it was an audition, proof that he deserved more than a clipboard and a depth chart footnote, proof that the doubts were wrong. And early on, it looked like he was delivering exactly that, calm under pressure, precise, confident. Cleveland felt something it hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The dangerous kind, the kind that makes a fan base believe again. But football has a brutal way of punishing optimism, and it never waits for a convenient moment. Because the injury itself wasn't the most controversial part of the night, not even close. What followed revealed something deeper, something uncomfortable. Booing from the stands, confusion on the sidelines, a celebration that crossed a line for some and fueled others. And behind all of it, a growing question that no one wanted to say out loud. Was this just another tough break, or the beginning of something much darker for a quarterback who already felt like he was fighting uphill? By the end of the night, one thing was undeniable. Shedeur Sanders didn't just walk off that field with a bandaged hand. He walked off with the attention of the entire league. Some saw toughness, others saw recklessness. Some saw a future leader, others saw a cautionary tale forming in real time. And as the footage replayed again and again online, one uncomfortable truth lingered in the air. Moments like this don't fade quietly. They either become legend or a warning. And what happened after that injury would decide which one this story was going to become. It happened so fast that most people didn't even realize what they were seeing at first. 1 second, the play was unfolding like any other snap near the goal line. The next, everything stopped. No celebration, no frustration, just Shedeur Sanders pulling his throwing hand in close to his chest and breaking into a sprint toward the sideline. Quarterbacks don't do that unless something is seriously wrong, and the silence that rolled through the stadium said it all. 70,000 people sensed it at the exact same time.
The cameras followed him, because of course they did. This was late December football, and Cleveland finally had something to believe in. As he reached the sideline, trainers rushed toward him, towels appearing almost instantly. At first, it looked routine, a precaution, maybe a jammed finger, maybe a broken nail. But then the towel came away, and the broadcast lingered just a second too long. What viewers saw was shocking enough that many would later say they wish they hadn't. Blood running down his hand, a pinky finger twisted in a way fingers aren't supposed to twist. Some swore they could see more than they should have, enough that sports outlets would later blur the images and fans online would argue about whether the network crossed a line by letting it go out live. Inside the stadium, confusion replaced noise. People stood instead of sat. Conversations died mid-sentence. This wasn't the kind of injury fans are used to seeing quarterbacks shake off. This wasn't a limp or a shoulder grab. This was something that made even seasoned football watchers uncomfortable. On the field, the Bills players backed away, unsure whether to celebrate the stop or respect the moment. On the Browns sideline, urgency took over. Medical staff didn't waste time. They moved fast, too fast for anyone to pretend this was minor. As Sanders disappeared into the tunnel, the weight of the moment hit all at once. Cleveland had waited decades for stability at quarterback. Dozens of names had come and gone, each one promising, each one eventually discarded. And now, just as this rookie was starting to look different, calmer, sharper, more in control, it felt like the football gods were intervening again. The scoreboard still showed a one-score game, but nobody was looking at it anymore. The outcome suddenly felt irrelevant compared to what might have just been lost. And yet, even as the shock settled in, something else was brewing beneath the surface, because this injury didn't just freeze the stadium, it exposed how fragile everything around Shedeur really was. The faith, the patience, the trust between the fans and the organization. And in just a few moments, that tension was about to explode in a way no one inside Huntington Bank Field was prepared for. The moment Shedeur Sanders disappeared into the tunnel, the stadium didn't erupt in concern, it filled with suspicion. Fans craned their necks, staring at the sideline, waiting for clarity that never came. No replay explanation, no official announcement, just a pause. And in Cleveland, pauses are dangerous. They create space for old wounds to resurface, for past betrayals to come rushing back. This fanbase has been conditioned to expect the worst, especially when it comes to quarterback decisions. When the backup jogged onto the field, the reaction was instant. Booing poured down from every corner of the stadium, loud and relentless, drowning out the play call. It wasn't subtle frustration, it was raw anger. Not at the players stepping in, but at what fans believed was happening yet again. Another quarterback pulled too soon, another decision that made no sense, another front office move that felt disconnected from reality. To them, it looked like history repeating itself in real time. From the stands, it didn't look like an injury situation. It looked like a choice, and that distinction mattered. Cleveland fans have lived through years of half-explanations and post-game justifications that never quite lined up. So when Sanders vanished without warning, many assumed the worst, that the coaching staff had lost faith, that they were panicking, that they were sabotaging the one player who had finally shown poise under pressure. None of that was confirmed, but in that moment, perception outweighed facts. The boos weren't about football anymore. They were about trust. Or the lack of it. Trust in leadership, trust in medical transparency, trust that when something good finally shows up, the organization won't find a way to mishandle it. And that's what made the reactions so loud. It wasn't a snap judgment, it was years of frustration boiling over in a single moment. Fans felt like they were watching another promising story get cut short without explanation. What no one in the stadium fully understood yet was that this wasn't a coaching call at all. This wasn't strategy. This wasn't a benching. It was an emergency unfolding behind closed doors. But by the time that truth would become clear, the damage was already done. Because the boos revealed something deeper than confusion. They exposed just how little margin for error this organization had left with its own supporters. And the next moment would flip that anger on its head in a way no one expected. Just when the tension felt unbearable, the tunnel stirred again. At first, people weren't sure what they were seeing. A figure stepped into view, helmet in hand, moving with purpose, and then the realization hit all at once. Shedeur Sanders was coming back. Less than 5 minutes after vanishing with an injury that had made an entire stadium hold its breath, he emerged again. Right hand wrapped in thick white bandaging, pinky completely immobilized, as if sheer willpower were the only thing holding it together. The reaction was instant and electric. The boos evaporated, replaced by a roar that shook the lower bowl. This wasn't approval, this was relief mixed with admiration. Sanders didn't wave, he didn't gesture to the crowd, he didn't ask for validation. He simply grabbed his helmet and headed toward the sideline throwing area, flipping short passes to test his grip. Each throw felt like a statement, not dramatic, not defiant, just deliberate, the kind of quiet message that travels faster than words ever could.
On the broadcast, cameras stayed locked on him because this was the story now. A rookie quarterback, barely established, choosing to re-enter a game in freezing weather with a damaged throwing hand. Analysts stopped talking about schemes and coverages. Social media lit up in real time. Clips of him tossing warm-up passes spread within seconds, framed as proof of toughness by some and recklessness by others. But regardless of where people landed, everyone was watching. When Sanders jogged back onto the field, the atmosphere shifted completely. The same crowd that had turned hostile minutes earlier now stood in unison. Whatever doubts existed about his commitment dissolved in that walk from the sideline to the huddle. He hadn't just returned physically, he'd reclaimed the narrative. This wasn't about a depth chart anymore. It was about resilience, about a player refusing to let a moment like that define him on someone else's terms. But football rarely rewards courage with mercy. And while Cleveland was still riding the emotional high of his return, the game itself was quietly slipping into chaos, because the punishment for staying in the fight was about to arrive from another direction entirely, and it would push this story from dramatic into downright volatile. The emotional lift from Shedeur Sanders returning barely had time to settle before reality crashed back down. Football has a cruel rhythm like that. One moment you're inspired, the next you're reminded how unforgiving the game can be. Not long after Sanders retook the field, Cleveland absorbed another gut punch. A key offensive piece went down hard, staying on the turf long enough for the mood to shift from concern to dread. Trainers rushed out, a cart followed, and just like that, the Browns weren't just fighting Buffalo anymore, they were fighting attrition. As the injured teammate was taken off, the energy drained from the stadium. This was no longer a feel-good comeback story, it was survival football. Sanders stood on the sideline between series, flexing his bandaged hand, shaking it out, trying to convince himself as much as anyone else that it would hold up. Every throw now carried extra weight, every hit felt more dangerous, and across the field, the Bills could sense it. Momentum doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just quietly switches sides. Then came the moment that changed the tone of the entire night. Late in the half, Buffalo found the end zone, and as the Bills celebrated, James Cook did something that instantly lit the fuse. He turned toward the Cleveland crowd and tapped his wrist, the watch celebration, the same gesture that had become synonymous with Shedeur's confidence, his signature, his statement. Performed right there, in front of fans who had just watched their quarterback bleed, disappear, and fight his way back onto the field. The reaction was immediate. You could feel it even through the broadcast. Gasps, shouts, a sudden surge of noise that had nothing to do with the scoreboard. To some, it looked like standard NFL trash talk, the kind of thing that happens every Sunday. But the timing made it impossible to ignore. This wasn't a random celebration. It felt targeted, personal, and whether that was the intent or not, perception took over instantly. Online, the moment detonated. Clips spread within seconds, slowed down, zoomed in, dissected from every angle. Some fans praised the audacity, calling it ruthless competition. Others labeled it classless, arguing that mocking an injured rookie crossed an unspoken line. The debate wasn't about rules anymore, it was about respect. And for Sanders, it added another layer to a night that was already testing him physically and mentally. Because now, this wasn't just about winning a football game. It wasn't even just about proven toughness. It was about pride, about how a young quarterback responds when he's hurt, doubted, and now openly challenged. And as the noise grew louder and opinions hardened, one thing became clear. This moment was going to follow Shedeur Sanders long after the final whistle. By the time the cameras cut away from the field, the real battle had already shifted somewhere else. Phones were out, clips were uploading, and within minutes, the internet was tearing itself in half. The watch gesture, the bandaged hand, the timing, it all collided into a moment tailor-made for outrage. What happened on that field was no longer just a football play. It had become a cultural flashpoint, and everyone had an opinion. On one side, fans rushed to defend Shedeur Sanders with fierce loyalty. They pointed to the injury, the blood, the return, the grit it took to keep playing. To them, the celebration wasn't competition, it was disrespect. Mocking a rookie while he played through visible pain felt like crossing a line that didn't need to be crossed. Posts flooded timelines calling it classless.
Unnecessary, classless, and emblematic of everything wrong with how young quarterbacks are treated in the league. For these fans, Sanders had earned a level of respect that night, whether the scoreboard reflected it or not. On the other side, just as loud, were those who saw nothing wrong at all. Football is ruthless. Celebrations are part of the game. If you don't want to be mocked, don't give up the score. That was the argument. They framed the gesture as psychological warfare, the same kind that's been happening in the NFL for decades. To them, Sanders choosing to return meant he was fair game. Sympathy had no place between the lines. And if anything, they argued, the moment proved he was being taken seriously at last. Caught in the middle was the clip itself, looping endlessly. Slowed down, zoomed in, paired with dramatic captions and reaction videos. Some accounts framed it as a turning point in Sanders' career. Others used it as fuel to revive old debates about hype, privilege, and whether he'd ever truly be judged on his own merits. The discourse spiraled fast, drifting far beyond the actual facts of the game and into something much bigger: identity, perception, and what toughness is supposed to look like. What made the divide so intense was how symbolic the moment felt. Sanders wasn't just a quarterback anymore. He had become a mirror. People saw what they wanted to see in him: resilience, entitlement, courage, arrogance, sometimes all at once. And while the teams prepared for the second half, the internet was already writing narratives that would follow him long after this game faded from memory. But the truth is, this clash didn't start with a celebration. It didn't start with an injury. It had been building for months, quietly, ever since Sanders entered the league under a microscope. And to understand why this moment hit such a nerve, you have to rewind back to how this story really began. Long before the injury, the celebration, or the internet outrage, Shedeur Sanders was already carrying weight most rookies never have to deal with. His name alone guaranteed attention. Expectations followed him everywhere, loud and unavoidable. Some saw opportunity, others saw entitlement. And from the moment he entered the draft process, the conversation around him felt less like evaluation and more like judgment. Analysts debated his ceiling, questioned his readiness, and dissected his confidence as if it were a flaw rather than a trait. Then came draft night, the first real fracture in the narrative. Projections had placed him near the top. Instead, round after round passed. Phones buzzed. Cameras searched for reactions that never came. When his name was finally called deep into the draft, it wasn't just surprising, it was humiliating by NFL standards. A quarterback once discussed as a franchise cornerstone, now introduced as a late-round experiment. From that moment on, the message was clear. Nothing would be given, and everything would have to be earned the hard way. The uphill climb only got steeper in Cleveland. Sanders didn't arrive to a clean slate or a patient development plan. He arrived to chaos, a crowded quarterback room, a depth chart that buried him before he ever took a meaningful snap. Weeks passed, then months. While injuries and inconsistency shuffled players ahead of him, Sanders stayed on the sideline, helmet on, waiting, watching, listening as commentators questioned whether he was even
ready for the league at all. He didn't respond publicly. No cryptic posts, no excuses, just silence. Rumors began circulating among fans and insiders, unverified but persistent, that the coaching staff didn't fully trust him, that his confidence rubbed people the wrong way, that his leash would always be shorter than others. None of it was ever confirmed, but perception has a way of shaping reality, especially in a market as restless as Cleveland. And when Sanders finally got his opportunity, it didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a test. One mistake, and the door could slam shut again. That's what made this moment different. Before the injury, before the chaos, he was playing the cleanest football of his young career. Efficient, composed, in control, not forcing anything, not trying to prove a point, just running the offense. For the first time, it looked like the waiting might have been worth it. And then, in a cruel twist that felt almost scripted, the night demanded another sacrifice. Because this wasn't just about a finger or a celebration anymore. It was about whether the grind, the slide, the silence, the doubt had forged something unbreakable or simply delayed the inevitable. And with the season winding down, the margin for error was gone. What happened next wouldn't just define this game, it could decide whether Shedeur Sanders ever gets another moment like it again. This is where the story stops being emotional and starts becoming dangerous. Because playing through pain is one thing, playing through the wrong kind of injury is something else entirely. For a quarterback, the throwing hand isn't just another body part, it's everything. Grip, spin, touch, confidence. And when that hand is compromised, especially late in the season, the consequences can stretch far beyond one Sunday. For Shedeur Sanders, the concerns stack up fast. Cold weather doesn't forgive injuries. Fingers stiffen, bandages tighten, sensation fades. A pinky might sound insignificant to casual fans, but quarterbacks know better. It anchors grip pressure, it stabilizes the release. Lose control there, and the ball sails, floats, gets picked. Suddenly, a tough decision to stay in the game starts showing up on the stat sheet, and the league is never patient with numbers. Then there's the schedule. What's waiting next isn't mercy, it's division opponents who know exactly how fragile situations like this can be. The Cincinnati Bengals, the Baltimore Ravens, physical defenses, aggressive pass rushes, teams that won't hesitate to test an injured quarterback early and often. Not out of malice, out of strategy. If there's weakness, it gets targeted. That's how this league works. Medical clearance becomes the wild card. Will doctors green light him to play? Will swelling limit motion days later? Will infection risk force a shutdown? None of that is public yet, and speculation online has filled the silence. Some fans believe the injury could quietly end his season. Others worry it could become the perfect justification for the organization to step back from him again, this time with medical cover. Those claims remain unproven, but the fact they're circulating at all says everything about the trust gaps surrounding this situation. And that's the most unsettling part. If Sanders struggles after this, will context matter, or will the narrative flip instantly? Toughness has a short shelf life in the NFL. One week you're praised for grit, the next you're labeled reckless or unreliable. If this gamble backfires, it won't just hurt physically, it could rewrite how decision-makers view him moving forward. That's why this moment feels so heavy, because if it goes right, it becomes a defining chapter, proof of resilience, proof of leadership. But if it goes wrong, it risks turning into something much colder, a cautionary example of how quickly opportunity disappears in this league. And that leaves one final question hanging in the air, unanswered and uncomfortable. Will this night be remembered as the moment Shedeur Sanders arrived, or the moment everything started slipping away? By the time the final whistle blew, the score almost felt secondary. What lingered wasn't the result on the board, it was the image. Shedeur Sanders standing on that field with his throwing hand wrapped, jaw set, eyes forward, refusing to disappear. For some, that image already feels iconic. The night a late-round rookie stopped playing the role assigned to him and forced the league to look closer. The night toughness stopped being a talking point and became visible, undeniable. There's a version of this story that gets told for years. The game people point to and say, that's when it changed. When Sanders stopped being a question mark and started being a leader. When a franchise starved for stability finally found someone willing to endure the chaos instead of folding under it. In that version, the injury becomes mythology, the mockery becomes fuel, and this night becomes the foundation of something bigger than one season. But there's another version too, and it's harder to ignore. The one NFL fans know all too well. The promising quarterback who gave everything too early. The organization that failed to protect its own investments. The moment that should have been a warning sign, brushed aside in the name of grit. In that version, the footage doesn't symbolize resilience, it symbolizes risk. A reminder that courage doesn't always get rewarded in this league. Right now, the story hasn't chosen which path it's on. That's what makes it so powerful.
The injury will heal, the debate will cool, but the consequences of this night will stretch forward, shaping decisions that haven't been made yet. Who starts next week? Who gets protected? Who gets patience? And who gets blamed if things go sideways? What's certain is this: Shedeur Sanders walked into that stadium as a rookie fighting for respect. He walked out as someone impossible to ignore. Teammates saw it, fans felt it, opponents acknowledged it, whether they meant to or not. And in a league built on survival, that matters more than any stat line. Whether this becomes a legend or a warning story won't be decided by one injury or one celebration. It will be decided by what happens next and how quickly the league forgets or remembers.